Привет всем! У меня есть маленькое объявление о том, как у нас все будет происходить. Оказывается, мы онлайн, и поэтому у нас довольно жесткий тайминг, поэтому если мы не успеем что-то на какие-то вопросы ответить или о чем-то поговорить, то, извините, нам придется это вынести за рамки трансляции и поговорить где-нибудь там в коридоре. Это первое. Второе, мы будем говорить на английском. Вот, я думаю, мы об этом предупреждали. Вот, и как-то так. Тем, которые мы будем покрывать, об этих темах мы, в общем-то, не договаривались, и это будет, по большому счету, импровизация и такой между собойчик и разговор друг с другом. So, let's begin. Let's start with introducing ourselves. I may introduce all of these guys. This is Jerome. He works for Docker. He is our guest. Jerome works as a Docker evangelist, and he's really cool at it. Here's Alexander. Alexander works for Express 42. And here's Anton. He works for Badu. And here is Andrew. He works for Spotify. And now, I work for Yandex, obviously. So, and now let the guys introduce themselves. Jerome?
Привет. Меня зовут Jerome, but я не говорю по-русски, sorry. Yeah, I work for Docker when I do a lot of evangelist and participating to conferences like that. My goal is to meet the people who use Docker, and if they use it and love it, it's great. But if they don't love it, then I want to know why, so we can make it better. And usually, my goal is to help to find the things that don't work in Docker so that we can improve, and also help people to learn about some cool features of Docker that they need to make it work. So if you see me like after the panel outside, don't hesitate to ask me questions about Docker as well.
I'm Alexander Titov. I'm working in company Express 42 as a managing partner and one of co-founder of the company. Our company is working on bringing working on help to developers bring stuff to production and minimize time of getting things done with code and put it on the servers on the production. And my goal of this panel session is try to understand how to Docker help us and our clients with that, and provide my vision of bringing Docker and configuration management together.
Hi, my name is Anton. I'm working on Badu company as a site reliability engineer, and for now we used Docker for some type of isolation our processes on some of the servers, and our company, as usual, make connection between people much more fun and easy to do that. And for me, the first benefit of that session is for understand next and something like roadmap in the Docker, because we have a lot of functions and things that we want, but we haven't for now in Docker. And I think we can make some discussion about that with Jerome, and maybe he can help us with our some things. Thanks.
Зачем нам микрофон? Он выключен. Окей. So I work for Spotify in a squad called CSI, that means Common Service Infrastructure. And the point of that squad is to use Docker everywhere where it's possible to use Docker. So about half a year ago I was working in Yandex building a game platform, and now I'm kind of doing the same in Spotify. So I'm in charge of building a platform which is called Helios for Spotify. So I don't know what we'll discuss here, but probably that will be useful for you at least.
So, guys, can you tell me or any of the people here, why do you chose Docker? How do you use it? And why exactly did you choose it and what for?
Jerome?
So inside of Docker, the company, we use Docker everywhere we can for two
Even
reasons.
on laptops.
Even on laptops, you know. So first, it's to do what we call dog fooding, so to use your own product. Because if you don't use your product, it's very hard to convince other people to use it. It's like, use the product. It's not good enough for us, but it should be good enough for you. No, so we use Docker ourselves, obviously, and we use that to run all the services around Docker. But now it's maybe a little bit more interesting to talk about the other companies that we have been working with and that are using Docker. So eBay and PayPal are starting to use Docker as part of the development workflow. They don't want to go to production traffic yet, but their idea is to shift little by little. So, okay, let's develop in containers, let's do QA and staging inside of containers, and then at some point in a few months, once we are sure that it works well and that we understand everything about containers and the challenge with containers in production, then we can actually have production traffic hitting containers. The biggest users of containers and of Docker in the beginning, like when just after Docker was out and we were telling to everyone, don't use it because it's not ready yet, there were some people using it anyway, and those big users were testing CI/CD companies. So now, for instance, Iron.io has a CI/CD platform, and they run, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's like millions of containers per week. And the other category of people using Docker anyway is crazy Russians with the Yandex team who use that as part of their pass. And that was also very exciting, but I think Andrei will be able to talk more in depth about that. Surprise!
Oh.
It's a hang leaf.
So I start with Spotify because I work at Spotify now.
Yeah.
So basically, about 3 months ago, Spotify actually deployed Docker to production in something called Cream. Cream is ads platform at Spotify. So basically, all the revenue is now generated by something inside Docker, which is cool. And that's one of the most probably important production process so far, apart from playing music, of course. But thing about Spotify is that people there, they don't really care about backing infrastructure, moving from bare metal, or doing multi-tenancy, because we have investors which give us money and we don't care about buying more servers. So instead of that, Spotify is moving towards something called one or less click to deploy. So the main goal of Docker in Spotify is to allow developers to move really super fast in developing process and building continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines to allow developers to just like do 1 click or do 0 clicks, or do 0.5 click to bring their code from their notebooks or whatever to production, like the fastest way possible. And yeah, and about Yandex, actually I gave a talk about that last year.
Yeah.
Should I repeat that? It's
Well,
about
we
an hour.
started using Docker in Yandex. How long ago? I guess it's 2 years ago, maybe. Yeah, and we ran Docker in production, and it was Docker 0.7, I suppose. It was a lot of pain, but well. Anyway. No, that was okay. We were ready. We love software which has 0 point something versions. We never release 1 point anything ourselves, so it was just a common process. And we use Docker, for instance, as a part of our PaaS system. We isolate processes in LXC containers, and Docker provides a very simple interface to liblxc, to LXC itself. Because there is liblxc, yeah, but it's, have you ever seen it? It's ugly, and it's very hard to use liblxc. So we just switch to Docker and we launch, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands, we never counted, containers per day. We stop them, we change them, we migrate them. We built the whole Docker infrastructure inside Yandex, like registry, like several deployments, several environments and stuff. And now it's really in production, like really in production. We process tens of thousands requests in our PaaS system, and about 50% of them are hitting the containers. And so, Sasha, tell us about why do you need Docker?
We don't use Docker in production actually because it depends on our clients. So we need to have client who wants Docker, and or we need some understanding how to describe for our clients that exactly you need to use Docker, and it's why it's one of my goal with talking with Jerome to understand how to buy Docker to other people. So a problem that we have, we need to make infrastructure as a service layer for our clients, so all developers or operations can create box with application in a few minutes. And now we use KVM and Xen for that, sometimes VMware, and it has a big pain because we want to create a lot of boxes because it has some over how to say a lot of work to create a box with application, and we try to find a solution to have one button to create a container in a few minutes, and Docker is exactly the solution. And other problems that we have when we implement Docker as infrastructure service, how to Docker connect with configuration management systems such as Chef, Puppet, or other stuff. Or probably we need to throw away all configuration management systems and use only Docker, something like that. And we don't have answer for this question. Do we need to use configuration management systems or Docker, and how to mix that? And I think we will talk about that on this session a little bit, and after that more.
We used Docker in production infrastructure, but not on all layers of it. For now, we used it at about 25 or 30% of our internal services. We used it and choose to use Docker because it have got much more nicer interface than something like LXC or other stuff about virtualization and something like that. But our first benefit was to run more services per one physical server with isolation environment, and we got it with Docker. And the second benefit about Docker usage in our company was to create simpler and faster something like continuous integration and deployment process, because we can create and automatically based on our body of knowledge base with services, we can create something like building directory tree for each service that we need to run in container. After that, we can create some automatically build a process and can choose what to do with new image. After some tests, we need to move it to deploy, move it to production, or we need to say or create some ticket in our ticket system to let our developers know about that we have some problems with new container. And that's all about benefits for now about Docker.
Why is it such a big hype about Docker? Why? I heard 3 of the guys right now talking about Docker like it's silver bullet. Why do you think it is? Yeah, only if I asked you, you will say, of course, that it's not silver bullet, but the whole of the internet is hyping that Docker will solve everything and containerization will solve everything, and you don't even have to have a hardware, something like that.
Well, we still need to run containers on something. We can run Docker on Docker, but we can't run Docker on, well, you can, but you can't run Docker on Docker on Docker on itself. You need some real machines at some point. I think a lot of the hype and a lot of the buzz and why people love Docker is really a kind of being at the right time and at the right place, because 2 years ago, the kernel mechanisms to make containers were not extremely stable yet. And from my personal point of view, the main thing that was missing was a good copy and write file system. Because one thing in the kind of wow effect in Docker is when you do Docker run Ubuntu and you have an Ubuntu container in a fraction of a second. You do Docker run Debian, you have a Debian container. Docker run Postgres, you have a Postgres container. It's really fast. You don't waste time waiting for a system to be provisioned. You don't waste time waiting for a VM to boot. And that's part of, I think, what people really love about it. And this was not really ready for prime time a few years ago. Of course, there are some excellent products to do containers. So, well, I'm sure that a lot of people know OpenVZ and the work that was made by Parallels. But this was not in mainline kernels. So many folks said, I don't want to use that because it's not in my main kernels. So Docker kind of cheated a little bit in the beginning by using a UFS, which is not in the mainline kernels, but which is in the kernels shipped by Debian and Ubuntu. So for all the people on the planet using Debian and Ubuntu, Docker was okay. It's not mainline kernel, but for many people, they don't even think about it because it ships with their distro. And then once we had that, we had a kind of a foot in the door to push forward containers. And then it was just when people were starting to accept the idea of immutable infrastructure, microservice architectures, those things were starting to be cool and people wanted to use it. But when you look at, for instance, Netflix, and they say each time we change a line in the CSS to change a color in the website, we make new server images and we redeploy 100 VMs. It's nice, but it's a lot of resources kind of wasted for nothing, and it's very complicated. And if you're a small company, not like Netflix, it's a lot of work just to change a color on a web page. But with containers, we could have that same workflow, make new images, deploy the images, run the images, but instead of paying a lot of money for VMs and waiting a lot of time for those VMs to build and start, we could have containers and build in seconds, start in fractions of a second, and have those new techniques, but without requiring a huge infrastructure and a huge investment. So I think it is part of the reason with all the hype around Docker. It's by itself, it's not magic at all. It's just taking the right technology at the right time to make some things that are useful to people. And so that's why it's changing a lot of things. If we hadn't done that, I'm sure that 3 months after, there would have been another project with a different name, and that would have leverage on containers as well. So it's just we're kind of waiting for the right time.
Okay.
I personally think that half of that hype is already feeding on itself. So I've seen several companies on like various infrastructure meetups in New York saying that, hey, we're starting a company to sell like diapers or cat food or something, and we want to use Docker. We don't know why we want to use Docker, but everybody's talking about Docker, so probably it will generate money like in our pocket directly. So yeah, let's use it for something. We don't know what.
Do you think is it the problem?
For me?
No, like for Docker community, for the
Is it a problem?
internet. Is it a problem? Don't you worry
No,
about
it's-
people hyping about the thing
It's
that
not a
they
big
don't
problem.
understand?
It might be a little bit like when in the beginning of virtualization, when Amazon started EC2 and said, okay, this is cloud, and lots of people were saying, okay, we need to use cloud because I've been told that cloud would reduce our capital expenditure and we would save money and make profit. And of course, it doesn't work like that. There are companies using physical machines in a very efficient way, and they are much more, they are wiser, and they make more profit than companies just using cloud but not knowing how to use cloud. So it's not because you have Docker that suddenly everything will be easy and everything will be solved. You can use it the right way or the wrong way, and sometimes the right way is very difficult because it's a very new technology and there are lots of things that haven't been explored yet. So I love to work on very weird projects. So when people tell me, oh, I'm trying to run Hadoop or some like Bitcoin mining or something like that inside of Docker, can you help me? And I say, yes, of course, I can help you. But it doesn't mean that it's a good idea. Docker might not be the best tool for that at the moment. And yeah, we can use it. I think technically anything that can run on Linux can run in containers and therefore can run on Docker, but it doesn't mean that it's a good idea. If you want to do some really intensive number crunching and every single little percentage of CPU and I/O is important, you can do that on Amazon virtual machines, but it will probably be much better if you have your own physical machines, at least if you have some sustained activity. So it's not because there is a lot of hype that everybody should embrace it and use it. I think in many places, I'm pretty sure that in almost every company, there will be at least one little project where Docker can help, even if it's something very small and not very critical to the business. But it doesn't mean that Docker will help for all the products and all the activity.
Guys, let's have a questions in like 10 minutes.
Right?
It's in 10 minutes, please. Or otherwise we'll be running out of time.
Different opinions.
Yes, please save it. Please save it. Please. Please. Well, okay, let's keep all the plan. Let's, you guys want to have a discussion, but let's try to make it short. And please don't forget to ask
Soviet
for a
Russia,
microphone.
there's no discussions.
Well, I believe we actually have a problem with Docker, with popularity. I saw the event about Docker yesterday, and I've heard a lot of strange things. I represent a Fedora project community, well, sort of. So yesterday I've heard a very strange things. People told me, actually you are, so that Docker allows you do not care about dependencies. Actually, dependencies are not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And what I've heard is somebody told we have 300,000 Docker containers, and I've heard we have 300,000 unpatchable, vulnerable application, we don't even have any provision to update them, we redeploy or whatever. So it's a problem, I believe, where people don't fully understand the domain we should have knowledge. Well, another one issue is, well, to be honest, thin provision is available not only for Docker containers, it also available for virtual machines for a quite long time already. If you were at FOSDEM this year, you heard a lot of good stories about GuestFS, which allows thin provision for virtual machine. You can run virtual machine in a few seconds, just that. So it's not a problem. It's comparable with Docker. So you have Docker, you have containers with vulnerable applications, and I don't even start about Linux yet. We have hundreds of thousands of vulnerable applications in containers, and we don't have a method to update them because you told people that dependencies are not necessary. I believe it's wrong approach, it's a very toxic idea, you should just abandon it.
Yeah, there are like two ways of doing dependencies. Dependencies and static linking.
Yeah.
Docker is static linking, that's all.
That's a problem.
So
Well, not everyone thinks that
It's
static
different way
link.
of doing things.
Yeah.
I believe it opens
You
a Pandora
should
box of
understand what you're
problems.
doing. You should understand what you're doing when you link statically, on when you use the
Exactly
container,
what I
or
told
when
you.
you use
We have a
dependence.
lot of people who don't fully understand the reality of things. You just mislead them.
No, I totally agree with the security part. It's like when doing static linking, when people tell me, hey, we're running MongoDB and Node.js, and MongoDB and Node.js will statically link OpenSSL. Then I just want to run away and scream, because it means that when there will be the OpenSSL exploit of the week, then my Node.js and MongoDB servers will become vulnerable, and I have no way to know about it. Because usually I can do like dpkg or RPM to check the version of OpenSSL, and see, okay, there is a vulnerability. If it's linked statically with Mongo and Node,
It's not only about static linking, it's also about outdated applications in the containers, because you can build something on top of the old unmaintainable Ubuntu revision and forget about that. Well, you don't have any tools to actually remind you that you should update it.
So the thing is that we need new tools, and
That is correct.
Right.
So you have to more than one processor in Docker. You told yesterday told me you don't have even SSHD in the container. However, I do believe we have much more in container. At least systemd in container. We need monitoring application, maybe outside the container, whatever maybe. So
right.
I believe there is a huge domain of issues. People just don't realize them. That's exactly the secret of popularity of Docker. A lot of people don't.
We take all the problems and
people love to violate the laws and rules. And if we have a tool to violate rules, we just started. For example, you cannot deploy a virtual machine without violation of dependency chain. Just package manager doesn't allow you to do it. However, in Docker, you can drop a statical link application, just executable, and it will kind of work. However, people just, that's my point actually.
People do intend to break the rules, and as Jerome mentioned, you may have Node.js and MongoDB, and nothing will ever save you. It's just a common problem of the current world web or not web stack.
You should actually противопоставлять counterpart package managers and containers. You shouldn't say that container allows you to. You shouldn't say that containers allow you to violate dependency chains, because it actually should use them. Should build something on top of the package managers. So that's exactly what people are missing. If we read a lot of hype on the internet, I read a lot of things about Docker, which start with, I'm using Ubuntu, whatever, and it allows me to build something on top of Ubuntu, whatever else, and I forget it, and I didn't update it.
Let's skip the dependency talk and talk about it later because we're running out of time.
Maybe I can
And,
answer quickly the security thing if you want. Do you want me to answer quickly the security thing? Because
Yeah,
so you're
probably,
right
yeah.
So yeah,
It talks about Linux and Docker.
so there is a lot of things that change when we use containers, and for security, the classic approach is, okay, let's have maybe something like tripwire or something else, but the idea is I have something checking my systems and telling me, hey, you have a vulnerable package here. For Docker, instead, the idea is that we can use immutable infrastructure, which means I have an image and I never patch a container. I make a new image and I throw away the container. And this means that when I want to do a security audit, instead of doing it on live containers, I can do it on my images because I never change my containers themselves. I always make a new image. So at a given time, what is running is what is on my image repository. So if I want to do my security audit, I can do it on the images. It means that like the future that we see, it's not like in 5 years, it's more like in maybe 5 months, and even maybe shorter than that, is okay, you give me the list of the images you're running, and I can, without touching your servers, I can look at the images and use the package management tools inside of the containers and check the versions and tell you, hey, that image is vulnerable and that image is running on this and this server, and so you should patch those servers. Of course,
So we should have some external.
Please speak in the microphone because people on the web don't hear you.
yeah,
And
it means
to-
we need new tools, but the good news, in my opinion, the good news is that those tools are not impossible to build and they are not too complicated. It requires a new, yeah.
Possible and already have it. So
Oh yeah, of course.
So-
I mean, yeah.
I'm going to have something to say here. So actually, this problem kind of goes away if you do continuous delivery, because when people deploy like every hour and build container every hour, then probably they will have these patches in the container, like and security fixes and whatever. And moreover, for example, in Spotify, we do something using the on-build instruction in Docker file. So we have this base image with Ubuntu and some Spotify stuff. So when you build something on top of that image, this on-build instruction actually kind of takes all the packages inside the container with the versions and whatever and sends it to a special security server. And that security server checks that the versions are okay, and if they're not okay, it returns like 1 instead of 0. And then you just can't build that container unless you go to the container guys and tell them like, hey, I can't build because it says that OpenCell is like out of date or something, and please fix your base image or something. And moreover, we actually are starting to do what Jerome mentioned, that when the container is built, it actually goes to a special security farm when kind of security scanners checks all the ports for known vulnerabilities, like if we have outdated bash OpenCell or something. And if it's okay, then that container goes to the registry, to the repo of containers. If it's not, then the container dies there. And you get an email saying that you're a kind of silly man, you have to do something else.
Nasta told me that we have questions on Twitter.
So Alexander Malayev asking Jerome, have you used Doku as in DOKKU, and what do you think about it?
I have not personally used it, but yeah, it's a small pass, nice when you want to have your own private pass and you don't need like crazy scaling and load balancing. I think it's great when you want your own private little pass, but you don't want to go into the complexity of this or Flynn or Gain or other bigger pass projects. But I don't have first-hand experience with it, unfortunately.
Okay. And then there's second question. Are you planning to create a high-level tool for container management, or Mesos and Kubernetes are okay?
Yeah, this is not you. Maybe. We are trying to add some things in Docker so that it becomes easier to make those tools. But for now, we will rather integrate with existing tools and make everything work together rather than enter that space. Yeah.
Hi. I'm Slava from Equit. We already invested into Chef infrastructure and successfully use it for years. Which ways do you propose to migrate from Chef environment to Docker? Do you have something, some tools around it, or we should just live in our already built environment?
So you can reuse your chef cookbooks by using them to build container images. The idea is that instead of using chef, knife, and all those tools directly on the servers, you run them in containers. And so when you build your new image, the cookbook will apply and create that image. It works, but there is a significant downside that you lose the incremental advantage of a Docker file. In a Docker file, if you have 15 steps and you change the steps toward the end, Docker will be smart enough to fast forward through the Docker file and start only to implement the new steps that have changed. If your step is just apply my cookbooks, then each time you change a semicolon in the cookbook, it will reapply everything and it will take 2 hours. So there are some ways to work around that, which are to break down the cookbooks in multiple smaller parts. And usually it's easy because if you have good cookbooks, they are already in multiple modules, and apply them one by one so that when you change a cookbook, instead of reapplying everything, it will only reapply the one that you have changed. To be 100% honest, it will not be as nice as a native Docker file, but at least you will be able to leverage on all the stuff that you have built for years before. So yeah, you can definitely use that.
Yeah, actually, I have additional question. By now, Chef, we live in Amazon AWS, and actually we just prepare the image AMI and live in mostly as quite similar to Docker way, but we use don't use Docker containers. We use AMIs. And why would we like move to Docker?
It's you see, it's a common question. It's not. It's a question which sounds like, should we change Docker to run our stuff, or should we change our stuff to run in Docker? And these are two completely different approaches, and they both have their benefits and downsides. And I believe that it really depends. You can't say in general what you're gonna do, because it really depends on your infrastructure. Like anything, should you use Linux or FreeBSD? It depends.
As I see,
No FreeBSD.
as I see this way, we can move some mess from chef cookbooks, chef roles, and chef versioning, and the problem with add some changes to chef and make new server, or add these changes on existing server. We can move this mess from chef cookbooks and chef repository to Docker and solve a lot of problem that can't solve with chef. And also, for example, we can use Docker file as a role for server, and chef only for describing configuration. And it's also a good way, because roles, environments, and service discovery in chef is awful.
So
Okay, and the last question. Do you work with Chef for the solution Chef container, which exactly allow to build a Docker on top of Chef? Or do you work with HashiCorp on the Packer solution to build the
So I'm not
Docker
aware
containers.
of any cooperation specifically with them, but if they come and have questions and want to integrate, of course we'll be happy to be part of that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll be happy to be part of this. Applies to everyone.
Yeah.
Docker has a large community. They are taking pull requests. It's confirmed. And well, if you really think that you need to change something inside the Docker, you may go and hack it yourself. It's written in Go, which is not obvious choice, but at least it's not Haskell, so you can hack on it. And you should sell pull request, for example, like we did. So I see that a lot of people are asking about configuration management and stuff. Is it, for example, in Spotify a problem? Do you have this configuration management versus Docker or configuration management with Docker? Are you?
Well, we don't use Chef, we use Puppet a lot. And I heard that it's like Spotify Puppet deployment is one of the largest in the world. And the Docker started as an experiment in a separate squad about a year and something ago. And because it was an experiment, guys there, they decided to not use Puppet because everybody hated Puppet already. So in the end, we ended up with something like Alexander said. So basically, Puppet is used to configure the bare metal. And then on that bare metal, we launch containers. And what goes inside these containers, we don't care. If people want to use the same Puppet infrastructure, they can do that. If they want to use Chef Solo or something, or Ansible, whatever, yes, you can do that. If you want to like populate container manually, copying files from your, I don't know, home directory, yes, of course you can do that. It will be crash or something, but you can do that. So it's not Puppet with Docker.
It's Puppet versus Docker.
It's not versus, it's Puppet is there, Docker is here.
Okay.
So how do you solve?
Roma.
So I can imagine how that may work if you have several independent services, but if you have dependent services on something like you have queue manager database, and you need to be sure that your app using right ports of other app. How do you solve this problem? Because
They say failure is learning.
Yeah, you connect all ports like in sequence, and when it starts to work, that's the right port. No, we
are
don't.
you using some kind of service discovery?
There's service discovery based on DNS. Yeah, it's called nameless. It's not open source. It works.
Okay, and are you guys using something like that?
So like what do we see as the best service discovery mechanism? Would that be the question? Or? Well, there are many ways to do service discovery, and we think that there is no one size fits all. There will be one which will be great for Spotify, one will be great for Yandex, because last time I heard Yandex is a little bit bigger than Spotify. there will be another one for my own blog, because I'm a little bit smaller than Spotify. And each time we want to use different mechanisms. Some of them will leverage on Zookeeper or etcd to store the address of the services. Sometimes you want to use DNS. Sometimes you want to do some multicast discovery with a protocol like Avahi. Sometimes you want to do something static when you have like Ansible, and Ansible knows where the containers are running, and when it starts a container, it knows where the others are, so it can provide all the information. It really depends. What we try to do is to give people a kind of a sample service discovery implementation. That's Docker links. It only works on a single machine, so it's not very useful for large setups. But the idea is, okay, when you will make your large-scale service discovery mechanism, try to make it so that it's kind of compatible with links, so that people can go from their local setup on one machine to the bigger setup distributed on a large cluster, and the containers will still work the same way. And if you manage to do that, then it's a big success, because it means that if you want to switch from one service discovery to the other, you can do it without changing your application, which is really a great achievement, I think.
So, and I have another question. As far as I know, Docker advocates packing one app to one container. So how do you solve logging and monitoring problems if you cannot like pack existing monitoring and logging tools inside the container? Are you changing your applications to send metrics and logs to somewhere, or how do you solve it?
We do change applications. We do have custom logger. We do have custom network configuration. We do have our own service discovery. Tell your colleague to. So, I'm sorry. It really depends.
I'm going to write him.
So this
Edward, you're popular.
I will do a talk about how we can compose multiple containers to achieve that. So I encourage you to check it. Unless you already have a more interesting talk to check, but yeah.
Thank you.
That was a little bit unexpected. And we have another question.
Yeah. Considering the previous question, do you think forcing the buzzword container is a good thing for Docker? Because in the end, the term container usually is about virtualization, lightweight virtualization. And Docker is it's not about virtualization at all. In the end, it's about application packaging and nothing more than that. And the whole idea behind Docker, at least as I see it, is a nice, neat way to package your application. It's not about virtualization. It's not about configuration management even. It's just the thing. So, a question for Jerome. Do you think forcing the word container is a nice thing for Docker? And a question to the other guys, what do you think about that?
So forcing what thing exactly? That's the part I...
The container term. Yeah. On every Docker talk you give, or other guys from Docker Inc. give, you always say about containers. All the press, all the publicity is about containers. You're basically forcing the term container, like the term. And historically, containers are about virtualization.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's because we needed a word to designate that, and we could have made Docker without containers and just as a kind of very fancy CH root, but we would have lost a lot of the advantages of Docker and containers in the same way. So they became kind of entangled both. It's containers, and some people know a lot about containers, but some others don't really knew the concept. So we had to explain, okay, let's say it's lightweight virtualization. It's not really virtualization, but there is a comparison that I like a lot. It's so 10 years ago when we started, 12, 14, 15, when we started to use Xen, some people say...
Jerome, I'm sorry, but we're running out of time.
Okay.
We have like 2 minutes left, and after that our translation will be cut off. We should continue the conversation like in the hall, and I would really like to ask you the important question about your current roadmap, because this is what's the most important right now. So can you please shortly describe the roadmap?
So we want to improve signature. So the latest release 1.3 added signature so that when you Docker pull Ubuntu, it says, yes, this is really Ubuntu by Canonical instead of Ubuntu made by some Chinese pirates. We want to extend that so that your own images can also have signature. We want to add support for hosts, volumes, and container groups. At first, just as very simple concepts, so that you can talk to multiple hosts and manage volumes, and so that you can start a group of containers. So at first, those concepts won't change the face of Docker, but as a second step, later next year probably, then you will be able to use that together to say, I want to have a group of containers together on a machine, or I want to have a group of containers but spread on multiple machines, and improve orchestration across the board. And that's the current roadmap. And of course, there is the announcement by Microsoft about Windows containers, which will be interesting.
And when? Okay, you haven't mentioned IPv6. Is it because no one in the world needs
I'm waiting
IPv6?
for your pull request.
Got it. So we should have to make it our own. Well, we have to finish now. We should continue conversation later, like in the hall. Please feel free to ask any questions. We're sorry that it's so short, but that's the format. Anton.
Спасибо, коллеги, что вы пришли.